I've known a few people who are Taurus, not the loud type, not the ones who need attention. They're more like a sturdy wooden chair in the corner of a room, always there, steady, reliable, barely noticed until someone needs a place to sit. Once, I asked a Taurus friend of mine why he was always the last one to leave whenever the group was going through something. He just smiled and said, "I guess I'm used to it." It sounded simple. But behind that sentence, I could feel years of habit. Helping others had almost become a reflex. If someone seemed unsteady, he stepped forward. If someone was overwhelmed, he quietly stood behind them. It's strange. They rarely stop to ask whether their presence is truly valued. I remember one night, streetlights reflecting on rain-soaked pavement. That same friend had just gone through a conflict at work. He defended a colleague, explained things, took responsibility, and somehow, he ended up being the one most misunderstood. He didn't blame anyone. He just said, "Maybe I assume everyone thinks the way I do." That stayed with me for a long time. The energy of Taurus, at least from what I've observed, feels like a small fire in a cold room. Not flashy, not dramatic, but warm enough to make anyone who walks in feel safe. They get so used to keeping the fire going for others that they forget they need warmth too. There are times when kindness becomes a familiar road. You keep walking it and walking until you stop noticing how far you've gone. Or whether your legs are tired, Taurus is persistent. They believe in stability, in keeping their word, in responsibility. But sometimes that persistence keeps them in places that no longer fit. I've seen a Taurus continue to hold up a relationship that had long lost its balance. The other person leaned on them like a solid wall. But even solid walls develop hairline cracks. Taurus just isn't used to talking about those cracks. For some reason, they often believe that if they try a little harder, if they're just a little more patient, things might smooth out. Maybe that comes from a simple belief that loyalty and consistency always matter, and they do matter. It's just that not everyone knows how to honor them. I don't think Taurus needs to become cold or distant. Maybe what they need sometimes is simply a pause, a quiet room, a moment to ask, who am I keeping the fire burning for? Iggy, and is my own flame growing smaller? Choosing to stop protecting people who don't value you is not the same as turning your back on the world. It might simply mean slowing down on that familiar road, looking around, and choosing to walk beside those who know how to walk with you. When Taurus learns to set gentle boundaries, the change is subtle. They're not less warm. They're warm in a more mature way. They begin to invest energy in their own plans, in peaceful mornings, in relationships that don't require them to brace themselves. And honestly, what I admire most about Taurus isn't how well they protect others. It's when they remember to protect themselves. That fire becomes steadier, more enduring, strong enough to warm others, but no longer burning itself out in silence. For Taurus, that shift is rarely dramatic. It's just a quiet adjustment, small, almost invisible, and yet somehow it changes the way they move through life. And that shift rarely comes through some dramatic event. It arrives quietly, like an afternoon when Taurus suddenly realizes they're tired, not because the workload increased, but because their heart has been bracing itself for too long. I once saw it in a friend's eyes, the same familiar calm, the same slow, steady way of speaking, but something felt deeper, more grounded. He stopped responding immediately every time someone asked for help. He paused longer before saying yes. Not because he stopped caring, he was simply listening to himself more. That quiet endurance has always been one of Taurus's most beautiful gifts. They can stay when everything feels chaotic. They can wait in a relationship long after others would have walked away. They believe that if they remain steady enough, something good can still be preserved. But sometimes that endurance begins to feel heavy. They pour out their time, their effort, even their trust for people who treat that sacrifice as ordinary. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the cost behind the calm surface. And Taurus, not one to complain, often swallows it whole. Like a road stretching through many seasons, They keep walking without looking back to see how worn their footprints have become. They don't change easily. They're used to being responsible, used to being the anchor, but very few stop to ask whether the anchor itself is trembling in the wind. There are nights when the streetlight filters through the window into a quiet room. Taurus lies there, not exactly sad, not exactly angry, just vaguely empty. A kind of breathlessness without a clear name. They tell themselves they're fine, but somewhere inside, something is thinning out. What stays with me most is not that they were taken advantage of. It's that they accepted it for so long, as if kindness were a duty that could never be withdrawn. They believe they're strong enough to endure a little more, but strength needs nourishment too. It isn't meant only to be spent. Then one day, perhaps in a very ordinary moment when they notice indifference in someone's eyes, or hear an offhand comment that quietly lands too hard, Taurus begins to understand that their patience isn't always placed where it belongs. That realization doesn't harden them, it makes them quieter. They start questioning boundaries. They begin to tell the difference between love and tolerance, between loyalty and abandoning themselves, not to blame anyone, but to adjust their own steps. From there, endurance no longer means staying at any cost. It becomes the steady commitment to protecting their own worth, keeping the inner flame burning evenly, not flaring wildly, but not dimming under cold winds either. Maybe the true cost of endurance isn't what they gave away. Maybe it's the moments they forgot they deserve support too. When Taurus finally faces that truth, their walk changes. Not loudly, not suddenly, just steadier, lighter, and somehow with a little more room to breathe for themselves. At first, that space to breathe can feel unfamiliar, like when a room that used to be filled with noise suddenly goes quiet. Taurus may not know what to do with the silence. They're used to being needed, used to having something to fix, someone to steady. When they no longer rush in to shield others right away, there can be a slight emptiness. But inside that emptiness, something else slowly begins to surface. The loyalty of Taurus feels like a long road. Once they step onto it, they don't turn back easily. They believe in staying, in keeping their word, in standing by someone once they've chosen them. There's something quietly beautiful about that loyalty. It doesn't demand attention, it simply remains. The truth is, not everyone understands what it really means. Some walk that road beside them without truly appreciating it. They treat Taurus's presence as something guaranteed, as if that solid wall was built to carry their weight. They lean on it, always place their burdens against it, and forget that even walls develop hairline cracks over time. I've seen a Taurus stay silent when something hurt them, not because they didn't feel it, but because they feared that speaking up might change everything. They would rather absorb the discomfort than disturb the stability they worked so hard to build. In some ways, silence can also be a form of loyalty. Loyalty to the image of strength they believe others need. Loyalty to the role of the steady one. But when loyalty is mistaken for obligation, it grows heavy. There are evenings when Taurus sits alone, light stretching long shadows across the floor. They think about the times they stayed even when they were tired, about the words they swallowed, and sometimes a small question rises quietly. Am I being loyal to someone else, or am I turning away from myself? That question is not easy, because loyalty runs deep in them. It isn't a jacket they can simply take off. It's part of their foundation, part of how they love, part of how they build trust. Yet when loyalty no longer meets respect on the other side, something begins to feel out of rhythm, like walking a familiar road but sensing the ground beneath you is uneven, the same path, the same companion. Yet each step feels heavier. When Taurus allows themselves those breathing spaces, they begin to look at their loyalty differently, not to reject it, but to place it where it belongs. Loyalty no longer means staying at any cost. It becomes a conscious choice. A choice to walk beside those who know how to slow down when Taurus is tired. This shift doesn't make them cold. If anything, it makes their love clearer. They stop pouring their endurance into places that offer no respect in return. They learn to say, "I'm tired," even if it's only in a short, quiet sentence. They learn to admit that they also need protection. And when Taurus stops silencing their own exhaustion, their loyalty doesn't disappear. It matures, less rigid, less forced, less about proving strength and more about honoring truth. Maybe, in some quiet corner of the heart, that is the deepest form of loyalty. There is loyalty to one's own values and to the peace they deserve to preserve. That kind of peace isn't something distant. Sometimes it's simply an afternoon where you don't have to wonder what you still owe someone else. It's the feeling of sitting still without scanning the room, without bracing yourself for the next unexpected weight to carry. A lighter space in the chest, like opening a window and letting cool air drift into a room that's been sealed for far too long. And yet, before reaching that kind of peace, Taurus often passes through something harder, to name a quiet depletion. There are days when everything on the outside looks normal, the work gets done, the messages are answered, advice is offered right on time. From a distance, no one would think anything is missing, but inside, the energy feels thinner, not a dramatic collapse, just a steady, subtle draining, like a water container with a tiny leak. No cracking sound, no obvious damage, just the level slowly dropping until one day Taurus realizes they don't feel as full as they used to. What makes it difficult is that there's no one clear person to blame, no single moment you can point to and say, that's when it happened. It accumulates. Through small compromises, through swallowed words, through nodding yes when the heart quietly tightened. Sometimes Taurus sits in a familiar coffee shop, voices humming all around, and wonders why they feel empty even in the middle of people. It's not exactly sadness, it's fatigue. The fatigue of always being the strong one, the understanding one, the steady one. They once believed endurance was an advantage, and in many ways it is. But when endurance isn't met with appreciation, it can turn into self-erosion. Taurus may not say that out loud. They often push a little further, thinking that once this phase passes, things will soften. But the body and the heart keep honest records, the shallow nights of sleep, the heavy mornings before the day even begins, the longer pause when someone asks, "Are you okay?" The answer is still, "I'm fine." Yet somewhere inside, Taurus knows they are not quite the same, and right there, a quiet shift begins. Not a dramatic decision to leave, not a sudden cutting off, just a growing attention to their own feelings. They begin to listen to the fatigue instead of pushing it aside. If you look closely, exhaustion isn't weakness. It's more like a gentle knock on the door from the body and the soul, a reminder that something needs adjusting, that maybe Taurus has been giving too much without keeping a portion for themselves. Once they stop ignoring that signal, life begins to slow down. They think twice before taking on another responsibility. They allow themselves to say no without carrying guilt for too long. And in those new quiet spaces, peace stops being an abstract idea. It becomes tangible, a deeper breath, a heartbeat that isn't racing, the sense that they don't have to brace themselves to deserve love or presence. And maybe when Taurus realizes that their energy is finite, not to hoard out of fear, but to value because it matters, they step into a different phase. A phase where giving no longer empties them, but comes from a place that feels whole inside. When giving is no longer a rushed reflex, but a calm, conscious choice, Taurus seems to change in the softest way. No one else notices at first, but they do. And they feel the shift clearly, like a familiar road suddenly widening, simply because they chose to walk a little slower. And there may come a day when Taurus sits alone in a quiet room and asks, "Who am I protecting and who is protecting me?" The question carries no blame. It isn't loud, it isn't sharp, it is simply a real pause, an unhurried evening, a chair by the window, a gentle lamp casting warm light, and a feeling safe enough to be honest with themselves. I don't see that moment as weakness. If anything, it takes more courage than all the times Taurus stepped in to carry someone else's weight. Because looking back at yourself means admitting there were places you tried for too long, relationships you held together with one-sided effort, promises you carried only because you didn't want to disappoint someone. But in that quiet room, there is no noise of expectation, no watching eyes, only the sound of their own breathing. And when Taurus truly listens, they may realize something very simple: kindness also needs to be placed wisely. Not everyone who needs you truly values you. Not every silence means understanding. Not every staying means love. That realization doesn't make Taurus bitter. It softens them. Like a fire shielded properly from the wind, it no longer burns itself out in the cold. It holds just enough warmth. From that moment of reflection, a new kind of self-respect begins to form. No announcement, no grand declaration, just small changes. They no longer over-explain when they need rest. They stop proving their worth through constant sacrifice. They no longer force themselves to be strong in every situation. They may still protect the people they love. They may still stay when it truly matters. But that protection no longer comes from fear of being abandoned or from the need to be recognized. It comes from a steadier place, a place where Taurus understands they do not have to trade their peace to keep someone beside them. And something unexpected happens. When they stop trying to hold everything together at any cost, the relationships that truly fit become clearer. Not because the world changed, but because Taurus changed the way they stand within it. They stand a little straighter, breathe a little deeper, look at others with calmer eyes. That moment of turning inward is not an ending. It feels more like a small fork in a long road. Taurus doesn't reject their past. They simply choose to carry what warms them and leave behind what exhausts them. And perhaps in that quiet understanding, they begin to see that protecting themselves does not make them less loving. It makes their love more honest because this time, it no longer comes at the cost of silent erosion. And when Taurus reaches that way of loving, they begin to see their role in other people's lives through a different light. Not the harsh light of obligation, but something softer, a light clear enough to see by, yet gentle enough not to blind. Letting go of the role of the one who holds everything together is not a decision made in a burst of emotion. It feels more like setting down a backpack you've carried for far too long. At first, your shoulders are still used to the weight. So, when you take it off, the lightness can feel almost unfamiliar. They may even wonder, am I abandoning someone? That question doesn't come from selfishness. It comes from care that has grown deep roots. But when Taurus steps back just one pace, the view widens. Not every argument requires them to mediate. Not every problem needs their hands to fix it. Some people need to learn how to stand on their own instead of leaning forever on the same steady wall. I once watched a Taurus choose silence where they would have once defended someone immediately. Not because they stopped loving, but because they understood they cannot live someone else's emotions for them. And that realization did not make them smaller. It made them more aligned with themselves. When they stop bracing to support everyone at once, they begin to feel their body again. Their heartbeat slows, their breath deepens. They start to see that peace is not the moment when everyone around them is stable. Peace is when nothing inside them is stretched tight like a wire pulled too far. There are mornings when they wake without that familiar sense that they must prepare for another battle. No scanning the day for who might need rescuing, just a warm cup of coffee, soft light through the window, and the simple feeling of being at ease in their own presence. What's striking is that when Taurus stops shielding those who don't value them, they don't close off. They remain warm, they remain steady, but their warmth becomes intentional. They no longer open their heart out of fear of losing someone. They open it because they choose to, because they feel safe, because they sense sincerity in return. And in stepping back, Taurus learns something deeply practical. They are not the bridge across every distance. Some roads must be walked alone. Some lessons belong to someone else's journey, and sometimes their silence becomes the greatest gift for themselves and for the other person. When they stop trying to carry everything, space opens up. Space for a small project once postponed, for a hobby long forgotten, for a dream that doesn't revolve around anyone else. And maybe in that space, Taurus begins to understand that their strength was never about how many people they could hold up. It was about knowing when to stand firmly for themselves and when to allow the world to unfold on its own terms. This release is not dramatic. There is no applause, no announcement. But inside, Taurus senses the shift. Or they are entering a different season, one where love is no longer a burden, and their presence no longer comes at the cost of silent exhaustion. When Taurus no longer has to spend all their strength holding up what feels out of rhythm, they begin to notice something about themselves. Their energy was always warm, always deep. Before, it was scattered, spilled out through quiet endurance, through late-night conversations meant only to keep the peace. Now, that energy seems to gather back in, like a flame shielded from the wind, steady again. The stability they feel isn't dramatic. It's more like walking a familiar road after a strong gust has cleared away the dry leaves. Same road, but lighter steps, clearer view. They're no longer walking with a constant sense of alertness, and no longer asking themselves, am I doing enough for everyone else? Instead, another question begins to surface. What do I want from this day? I once saw a Taurus return to an old dream, something they had quietly labeled less important than other people's needs. Maybe it was a small project, a class, or simply time set aside to care for their body and mind. When energy is no longer drained by unbalanced connections, space opens. Space to create, to think more deeply, to feel more fully. Their steadiness, once diffused, becomes more visible. Not the kind of steadiness that grits its teeth, but the kind that rests naturally in itself. They don't need to prove anything. They just need to be present, whole, grounded enough. And something else begins to shift. The sincere connections stand out more clearly. Taurus starts to notice who truly listens when they speak, who slows down when they're tired, who does not treat their sacrifice as expected. Those relationships don't require grand promises. They require balance, an exchange that moves both ways like two people holding the same rope, neither letting go nor pulling too hard. When their energy returns to where it belongs, Taurus no longer feels the need to fragment themselves to fit someone else's expectations. They can stand in a crowded room and still keep quiet inside. They can say no without carrying guilt for days. Like a late-night lamp that no longer flickers from too much strain, their light becomes steady, not blinding, not dim, just enough to illuminate the next step. And maybe when Taurus places their energy into what truly matters to them, they begin to feel a simple kind of joy, the joy of living without bracing themselves, a quiet ease in knowing they don't have to protect everything to be worthy of love. The road ahead still has uneven ground, like anyone else's. But this time, Taurus walks at their own rhythm, not rushing to rescue, not holding on at any cost, just walking carrying the steadiness they have reclaimed and an energy that no longer leaks away in silence. Maybe what truly matters is not changing other people. Maybe it begins when Taurus realizes their worth does not need to be proven through unconditional sacrifice. Choosing to stop protecting those who don't value them might look like a small step, but sometimes that small step opens a deeper path, a path of self-respect, self-protection, and growth in a way that feels uniquely their own. That kind of growth makes no loud sound. It is not a door slamming shut. It is more like gently closing a door so the wind no longer rushes through the room. Taurus does not need to announce anything to the world. They simply adjust how they stand within it. There is a form of peace that is difficult to see from the outside. It appears when Taurus no longer tries to be the strongest person in the room, when they stop rushing to explain, to rescue, to fix. They can still listen. They can still care. But they no longer trade pieces of themselves just to remain in someone else's view. They can love without shrinking to make others comfortable. And that quiet maturity does not make them less warm. It strengthens their warmth, like a flame placed in the right spot, no longer burning itself out in the wind, but glowing steadily in a safe space. Along the way, Taurus may still waver. There may be moments when they feel tempted to return to old habits, to shield, to carry, to take on someone else's weight. That does not make them weak. It simply reminds us that they are human with a soft heart and a very real sense of devotion. But each time they remember how light it feels not to brace themselves, each time they sense a balance between giving and receiving, they may quietly know they are moving in a direction that feels right for them. I sometimes wonder if one day Taurus looks back at the road they've traveled, what will bring the deeper smile? The number of people they saved, or the moments they had the courage to keep themselves? Perhaps the answer is different for everyone. And in the stillness of an evening, when the lights soften and breathing slows, Taurus may come to see that their value was never tied to how much they carried for others. Sometimes, simply being themselves steady, whole, no longer wearing themselves thin, is already a very beautiful form of growth. The story may rest here for now, but the journey continues like a slow step along a familiar road, where Taurus no longer walks to hold up the world, but walks to remain fully with themselves.